Why was it once perfectly illegal in this state to open an umbrella on a sidewalk because it spooked the horses, yet completely normal for a grown man to legally drive the wrong way down a one-way street as long as he tied a glowing lantern to his bumper? Welcome to 71 Dumbest Social Norms from 1950s Alabama that people actually followed, where we are exposing the wildest historical facts like the Time Bear wrestling matches were a legit county fair attraction, alongside absurd rules about pumping your own gas and the bizarre myths folks genuinely believed, like thinking a red car meant you had loose morals. We are proving which insane stories are 100% real Southern history and which are just sweet tea-soaked legends, so hit that subscribe button before we reveal the truth. 1. Back in 1950s Alabama, if a teenage girl ever worked up the courage to ask a boy to the school dance, she basically signed her own social death warrant. Picture sweet little Betty Lou marching up to Tommy at the soda fountain, asking him to the spring formal, and within 20 minutes, the entire town of Tuscaloosa knew about it. Her mama would clutch her pearls, the preacher would side-eye at church, and Tommy himself would probably faint into his root beer float because girls were supposed to wait quietly forever. 2. Over in Lee County, Alabama, somebody on the city council apparently had a personal vendetta against roasted peanuts because selling them on a street corner after sundown on a Wednesday was straight up illegal. Imagine poor old Earl pushing his peanut cart down the sidewalk at 7 p.m., minding his own business when Sheriff Buford rolls up with the siren blaring like he just caught a bank robber. Earl gets cuffed over a paper bag of warm Planters while Tuesday peanuts walk free. 3. A truly bizarre Alabama prison rule said that white and black inmates could absolutely not be chained or handcuffed together, not even while breaking rocks under the blazing summer sun. So you had Bubba and Leroy, two convicts caught stealing the exact same chicken from the exact same coop, but the warden had to assign 2 separate guards and 2 separate chain gangs just to keep them apart. Meanwhile, actual murderers walked free in the yard because the prison ran out of properly segregated shackles. 4. In 1950s Alabama, a woman pulling out her lipstick at a restaurant dinner table was treated like she just committed a federal crime against decency. Picture Dorothy at the country club in Birmingham, casually dabbing her Revlon cherry red between bites of pot roast, when suddenly every blue-haired lady at the next table gasps in horror. The waiter pretends to faint. Her husband Harold slides under the table from secondhand embarrassment. Dorothy got blacklisted from 3 church socials over 1 tube of lipstick. 5. Alabama actually had a law saying you could legally drive down a one-way street going the wrong direction, but only if you tied a lit lantern to your front bumper first. Imagine Cletus weaving down Main Street in Mobile at midnight, his Ford pickup glowing like a haunted pumpkin, while terrified families drove the correct direction toward him. The sheriff would just tip his hat and wave because technically Cletus was following the law. Meanwhile, sober drivers got tickets for forgetting to signal. 6. Pregnant women in 1950s Alabama were basically expected to vanish from public life the second their belly poked out, like some kind of maternity witness protection program. Poor Margaret was a top-notch secretary at a Huntsville insurance firm, the best typist in 3 counties, but the moment her boss, Mr. Henderson, noticed her dress getting snug, he handed her a goodbye fruitcake and showed her the door. She wasn't sick, she wasn't even tired, she was just visibly committing the crime of pregnancy. 7. In 1950s Moby, Alabama, throwing plastic confetti at a civic parade could land you in handcuffs faster than punching a police horse. Imagine little Jimmy at the Mardi Gras parade, sprinkling some colorful paper bits onto the float carrying the mayor's wife, when Officer Boudreaux materializes out of nowhere with a citation book. Jimmy's daddy had to pay a fine bigger than the family grocery bill, while drunken adults screaming obscenities at the parade got a friendly wave from the same officer. 8. A young man picking up his date in 1950s Alabama didn't just honk the horn and wait. Oh no, he had to walk inside and face a full FBI-style interrogation from her father. Picture nervous Bobby ringing the doorbell to take Sally to the malt shop, only to find her daddy Earl waiting in the living room polishing his shotgun. For 45 minutes, Earl grilled Bobby about his church attendance, his daddy's farm, his blood type, and whether he respected the Constitution. 9. Playing a friendly card game or rolling dice in an Alabama public park on a Sunday was treated like organized crime under the state's super strict blue laws. Imagine 4 grandpas gathered under a magnolia tree in Birmingham, sipping lemonade and playing a peaceful round of gin rummy after church, when suddenly Officer Wilson swoops in like he just busted a Vegas casino. He confiscates their cards, their poker chips, and even Grandpa Joe's lucky penny because apparently Jesus personally hated Crazy 8. 10. Black barbers in 1950s Alabama were legally banned from cutting the hair of white women or children, which created some genuinely ridiculous chaos in small towns. Picture Mr. Washington, the most talented barber in 3 counties with 30 years of scissor experience, having to turn away little Timmy who just wanted a bowl cut before picture day. Timmy's mama drove 40 miles to find a legally approved barber who promptly butchered the kid's hair so badly his school photo looked like a crime scene. 11. In 1950s Alabama high society, showing up late to a fancy dinner party meant you got exiled to the kitchen to eat your meal with the cooking staff like some kind of Victorian punishment. Imagine poor Charles strolling into the Vanderbilt mansion in Montgomery 20 minutes past 7, only for the butler to silently point toward the servants' quarters. Charles sat between two confused maids eating cold pot roast while hearing the laughter of guests drifting in from the dining room. He never wore a watch again. 12. Alabama drivers in the 1950s had this unwritten rule that you only lightly tapped your horn at a green light, because laying on it was apparently the rudest thing a human could do. Picture sweet old Mrs. Henderson sitting at a green light in downtown Birmingham, completely zoned out daydreaming about her Azale's teas, when impatient Frank behind her honked like a normal person. Frank got reported to 3 different church committees, blacklisted from the Rotary Club, and his wife stopped speaking to him for a week. 13. Married women in 1950s Alabama could not legally open a bank account or get credit without their husband signing off like she was a child needing permission for a field trip. Picture Linda walking into First National Bank in Tuscaloosa to deposit money she earned from selling her own pies, only for banker Mr. Caldwell to demand her husband Ronnie show up first. Ronnie was conveniently passed out drunk at home, so Linda's pie money sat in a coffee can for 6 months. 14. In 1950s Montgomery, Alabama, opening an umbrella on a public sidewalk was actually banned because city officials genuinely believed it would spook the horse-drawn carriages still rolling through downtown. Picture poor Edna stepping out of the courthouse during a sudden rainstorm, popping open her floral umbrella for 1 second, when suddenly Officer McGee writes her a ticket bigger than her grocery bill. Meanwhile, actual cars zoom past honking their horns at the horses, which apparently bothered nobody on the city council. 15. Going steady in 1950s, small-town Alabama meant publicly exchanging matching sweaters, which families treated like a legally binding engagement contract signed in blood. Picture 17-year-old Mary Ann wearing Tommy's baby blue sweater to school on Monday, and by Tuesday afternoon, both sets of parents were already planning the wedding reception at the church basement. When Tommy tried to break up 2 weeks later, Mary Ann's daddy showed up with a deed to a starter home and said, "Son, that sweater was a promise." 16. Buying anything on a Sunday in 1950s Alabama could literally get you arrested, with the only exception being emergency pharmacy prescriptions for people actively dying. Picture poor Henry running out of motor oil on a Sunday afternoon, walking into the only open gas station, and getting hauled out in handcuffs by Deputy Wilbur for attempting to purchase a single quart. Henry tried explaining his car was overheating, but Wilbur said, "Son, your engine can sin on Monday like a respectable Christian vehicle." 17. Public taxicab companies in 1950s Alabama were legally required to maintain entirely separate fleets of cars for white and black passengers, which created absolutely insane logistical nightmares. Picture the yellow cab dispatcher in Birmingham trying to manage 2 completely different garages, 2 sets of mechanics, and 2 phone lines, all to drive folks the exact same 3 blocks downtown. Meanwhile, poor Mr. Thompson waited 45 minutes in the rain for the correct cab while empty taxis drove past him every 2 minutes. 18. At a 1950s Alabama church potluck, you were socially obligated to eat a tiny portion of every single dish on the table or risk mortally offending the cook for the next 3 generations. Picture poor Walter trying to politely skip Mrs. Southern's notorious tuna jello mold, only to feel her death glare burning into his soul from across the fellowship hall. Walter ended up choking down 27 different casseroles, including one with marshmallows and lima beans, and spent the next 2 days hospitalized. 19. Parking your car in the blazing Alabama sun during the 1950s was considered the act of a complete moron, so finding shade became a deadly serious competitive sport. Picture downtown Birmingham at noon with grown men in suits literally racing each other to claim the one magnolia tree on Main Street like it was the last lifeboat on the Titanic. Old mister? Pritchard once threw his Cadillac into park, jumped out, and physically fought banker Mr. Caldwell over a single patch of oak tree shade. 20. In 1950s Alabama, a woman wearing blue jeans in public outside of actual farming work was treated like she just paraded down Main Street in a swimsuit. Picture young Joanne strolling into the Piggly Wiggly in Auburn wearing dungarees because she was helping her daddy fix a fence later that afternoon. The cashier gasped. The bag boy dropped a watermelon. Mrs. Crawford from the Baptist Women's League marched right over and informed Joanne that proper ladies wore dresses to buy bologna. 21. In 1950s Alabama, scattering common rock salt onto railroad tracks was classified as a major felony because cows kept wandering onto the lines to lick it up and getting absolutely demolished by freight trains. Picture some bored teenager named Jeb thinking he was being clever sprinkling salt for his uncle's cattle, only to cause a 3-locomotive pileup outside Selma. Jeb got hauled before a judge who lectured him for an hour, while 3 angry conductors and 1 widowed farmer demanded his head on a platter. 22. Dating couples in 1950s rural Alabama were expected to stay within a strict 3-mile radius of the girl's house, like she had an invisible electric fence around the property. Picture young Donnie trying to take Betty Sue to the drive-in theater 7 miles down the road, only for her daddy Vernon to appear in his pickup truck, blocking the only exit. Vernon informed Donnie that anything past Miller's Creek was officially considered a kidnapping under Mason family law, and he had a shovel ready. 23. Running or selling tickets to a live bear wrestling match at an Alabama county fair was actually classified as a serious misdemeanor, though somehow it kept happening anyway. Picture the 1953 Talladega County Fair where promoter Slim Hutchins charged folks 50 cents to watch a drunk farmer named Earl grapple with a sedated black bear named Gertrude. The sheriff showed up halfway through, arrested Slim, fined Earl, and then quietly asked if he could buy a ticket for next weekend's rematch. 24. Bus and train station waiting rooms in 1950s Alabama were legally required to have physical masonry walls separating travelers by race, turning every depot into an absurd architectural maze. Picture poor confused tourist, mister. Henderson from Ohio arriving in Birmingham, wandering through a labyrinth of brick partitions trying to find the ticket counter, accidentally entering 3 wrong rooms before finally locating his platform. He missed his train, his connecting bus, and eventually his entire vacation just trying to navigate the depot's insane wall situation. 25. Upper-class Alabama families in the 1950s had this unbreakable etiquette rule that you absolutely never mentioned the monetary cost of anything you owned, no matter what. Picture wealthy Mrs. Beauregard hosting a garden party in Mobile and some Yankee house guest from Connecticut casually asking how much her new chandelier cost. The entire room went silent. 3 ladies fainted into their mint juleps. Mr. Beauregard pretended he suddenly had to check on the horses, and the Yankee was politely never invited to anything ever again. 26. Hitchhiking across counties was not just legal in 1950s Alabama, it was openly encouraged for college students, like the world's most dangerous Uber service. Picture young Auburn University student Bobby standing on Highway 280 with a cardboard sign reading Birmingham or bust, getting picked up by complete strangers without a single concern from anyone, including his own mother. Bobby once rode in the back of a chicken truck with 17 live hens and a moonshiner named Cooter, and his mama called it a wholesome learning experience. 27. High school home economics textbooks in 1950s, Alabama literally taught teenage girls that their main purpose in life was helping their future husband unwind after his hard day at work. Picture Mrs. Crawford's classroom in Tuscaloosa, where 17-year-old girls took notes on how to greet hubby with a smile, fluff his pillow, and never bother him with their tiny lady problems. Future Dr. Linda raised her hand to ask about careers and got sent to the principal's office for being uppity. 28. Impersonating a priest, rabbi, or minister in public anywhere in 1950s Alabama meant immediate jail time, no questions asked, no excuses accepted. Picture poor traveling salesman Marvin who showed up in Decatur wearing a black suit and a white shirt buttoned high, just trying to sell vacuum cleaners door to door. 3 housewives mistook him for a Methodist preacher and asked for blessings on their cornbread. Marvin played along for one afternoon and spent the next 90 days in the county jail eating actual prison cornbread. 29. In 1950s Alabama high society, if a young man failed to gently kiss a lady's hand upon formal introduction, he was immediately labeled as completely uncultured and possibly raised by wolves. Picture nervous farm boy Cletus meeting Miss Eleanor Worthington at a Mobile debutante ball, sticking out his sweaty palm for a handshake instead of bowing properly. Eleanor's mother gasped so hard her corset popped. 3 chaperones whispered behind their fans, and Cletus was politely walked to the door before dessert was even served. 30. Selling a new mattress on a Sunday morning in 1950s Alabama was completely illegal, regardless of whether your house just burned down with your old one inside. Picture poor, desperate Wanda showing up at Hutchinson's Furniture in Anniston after a Saturday night kitchen fire, begging owner Bert to sell her literally any bed before nightfall. Bert refused, citing the sacred blue laws, and Wanda's entire family slept on the church pews for 2 nights while Bert went to service and prayed for her comfort. 31. Public school textbooks for different racial demographics in 1950s Alabama could not legally be stored together in the same warehouse building, which created absolutely insane logistics. Picture the Birmingham Schools Board renting 2 completely separate warehouses across town from each other, paying double rent, hiring double the staff, all to keep identical math books from touching.
Superintendent Mr.
Caldwell once accidentally mixed up 2 boxes and had a complete meltdown, calling in 3 janitors at midnight to sort algebra textbooks by which child would eventually touch them. 32. Refusing a glass of iced sweet tea when entering an Alabama home in the 1950s was treated as a personal insult so severe it could end family friendships forever. Picture poor Yankee businessman Mr. Wallace from Boston visiting his Alabama in-laws and politely declining tea because he just had coffee. Aunt Mildred clutched her chest. Uncle Buford stopped speaking to him. The family dog growled. 20 years later, Wallace's wife still got Christmas cards from cousins, reminding her about that one terrible Tuesday in 1954-33. Pumping your own gas in 1950s, Alabama was considered the height of rudeness because the attendants did absolutely everything, from filling the tank to washing the windshield to checking your engine oil. Picture some impatient Yankee tourist named Howard stepping out of his Buick at a mobile filling station, trying to grab the pump himself to save time. Attendant Jimmy Ray physically blocked him with his whole body, snatched the nozzle back, and called Howard's wife inside to apologize on his behalf for the embarrassment. 34. Young women in 1950s Alabama who showed interest in law school were politely redirected toward early childhood education or nursing, like their tiny lady brains might explode reading court cases. Picture brilliant 17-year-old Margaret announcing at the family dinner table she wanted to become an attorney like her hero Atticus Finch. Her father choked on his cornbread. Her mother started crying into the mashed potatoes. By dessert, Margaret had been enrolled in nursing school against her will, and her law books were donated to the church. 35. Alabama law enforcement kept a strict anti-mask law, specifically active to prevent unauthorized hooded groups from marching through public streets, which sounds wholesome until you remember why. Picture Sheriff Buford pulling over 4 guys in white pillowcases on the way to a midnight meeting outside Tuscaloosa, citing them for improper headwear. The guys argued it was for a costume party. Buford wrote them tickets anyway, then went home and told his wife the most ridiculous lies he heard that whole week. 36. In 1950s Alabama, a young man had to formally ask a father for explicit permission before inviting his daughter to a simple movie theater outing, like he was negotiating an international peace treaty. Picture nervous Robert showing up at the Henderson farmhouse, hat in his sweaty hands, requesting permission to take Susan to see Singin' in the Rain, mister. Henderson grilled him for 90 minutes about his intentions, his church affiliation, and his daddy's crop yields before finally granting permission with a strict 9 p.m. curfew. 37. Operating an outdoor drive-in movie theater past midnight in 1950s Alabama was actually illegal because city councils genuinely believed it would prevent the community from getting productive sleep for work. Picture the Starlight Drive-in owner Vernon getting a citation at 12:01 a.m. during a triple feature of horror flicks, while 200 teenagers in parked cars booed Officer Darrell from their backseats. Vernon argued his customers were already awake watching movies. Officer Darrell said, "Son, that's exactly the problem we're trying to fix." 38. White nurses in 1950s Alabama were legally prohibited by state hospital boards from entering or working in wards treating black male patients, which created absolutely chaotic medical staffing nightmares. Picture Nurse Eleanor at Birmingham General sprinting between 3 different floors, barred from helping a heart attack patient 1 room over because of her assigned ward. Meanwhile, poor Mr. Jackson lay there needing basic care while administrators frantically searched for an approved nurse, eventually finding one asleep in a break room across the entire hospital. 39. Hosts in 1950s Alabama were socially required to insist at least 3 separate times that their guests take additional portions of food, turning every dinner into an exhausting negotiation. Picture poor stuffed Uncle Pete at the Henderson family Sunday supper, already on his second helping of fried chicken, watching Aunt Mildred march toward him with the platter for the 4th time. Pete tried saying no thanks. She insisted. He declined again. She insisted harder. Eventually, Pete unbuttoned his pants and ate 3 more drumsticks just to escape. 40. Alabama car buyers in the 1950s heavily avoided purchasing vehicles with bright red paint jobs because the color was widely associated with loose personal morals and questionable life choices. Picture poor businessman Carl test driving a shiny red Chevrolet at a mobile dealership, only to have his pastor pull up alongside at a stoplight and just sad shake his head. Carl returned the car within 24 hours, traded it for a respectable beige sedan, and spent the next 3 Sundays apologizing during church confession to be safe 41. Widows in 1950s Alabama were socially expected to wear completely dark mourning garments for up to a full year after their spouse's death, like a walking grief uniform with no exceptions. Picture poor 60-year-old Mrs. Henderson sweating through July in head-to-toe black wool, fanning herself at the grocery store, while neighbors clocked exactly how many days she had left to wear it. When she finally showed up in a navy blue dress on day 361, three church ladies whispered she was practically rushing into another marriage. 42. In 1950s Alabama cities, leaving your horse hitched to a downtown lamppost for more than 2 hours was actually a finable city ordinance violation, even though half the town still rode horses everywhere. Picture old farmer Buford tying up his mule Daisy outside the Selma post office while he ran errands, completely losing track of time chatting with the postmaster. Buford emerged 3 hours later to find Officer Wilbur writing a ticket and Daisy on somebody's prize-winning flower arrangement. 43. Dating more than one boy at a time in rural 1950s Alabama instantly turned a girl into the town pariah, complete with whispered gossip at every church social for the next decade. Picture poor Linda, casually going to the malt shop with Tommy on Friday and the movies with Jerry on Saturday, completely unaware she had committed a felony against small-town morality. By Monday morning, the entire town knew. By Tuesday, her mama was crying. By Wednesday, Linda was sent to live with her aunt in Mississippi, 44. Hunting or fishing on a Sunday morning during church hours in rural 1950s Alabama was a serious finable offense because apparently Jesus personally hated bass fishermen. Picture poor Earl sneaking down to Lake Martin with his tackle box at 9 a.m. Sunday, thinking nobody would notice him skipping service. Pastor Wilkins drove past on his way to the pulpit, slammed on his brakes, and personally called Sheriff Hutchins from the church phone. Earl got fined $12 and lost his only catfish to a heron during the arrest. 45. White and black workers at Alabama textile mills in the 1950s were legally forced to use entirely separate building entrances and stairwells, turning every factory into an architectural nightmare. Picture the cone mill in Huntsville with forced airfare cases, 3 separate break rooms, and 2 completely identical front doors 15 feet apart from each other. Foreman Mr. Caldwell once accidentally directed Bobby Joe through the wrong stairwell, and the entire production line had a 45-minute meeting about proper door usage protocol. 46. Families in 1950s Alabama were socially expected to dress up in their full church clothes just to eat a regular Sunday dinner at home, even if it was only fried chicken in the kitchen. Picture little Billy sweating through his itchy wool suit at the kitchen table, his sister Mary Beth in white gloves trying to butter her biscuit, while their mama wore pearls to fry okra. Daddy kept his necktie on so tight he nearly choked on a chicken bone reaching for the gravy boat. 47. Alabama truck drivers in the 1950s were expected to flash their high beams exactly twice to signal it was safe for cars behind them to pass, like a polite Morse code highway language. Picture trucker Hank rolling down Route 31 outside Birmingham, flashing his lights at impatient salesman Murray behind him in a Buick. Murray completely misunderstood, thought Hank was insulting his mama, and chased the truck for 15 miles honking before discovering at the next gas station that Hank was just being courteous. 48. Women in 1950s Alabama who dared to remain unmarried past the age of 25 were publicly labeled lonely, tragic spinsters destined to die alone, surrounded by cats. Picture 26-year-old Eleanor running her own successful flower shop in Mobile, completely happy and financially independent, while every aunt at every family gathering kept asking when she was finally going to settle down. Cousin Mildred once cornered Eleanor at Thanksgiving and offered to set her up with her dentist, her milkman, and her recently widowed mailman. 49. Tossing a used match or lit cigarette butt onto a wooden town sidewalk in 1950s Alabama was an immediately arrestable fire hazard because half the downtown infrastructure was basically dry kindling. Picture traveling salesman Vernon flicking his lucky strike onto the sidewalk outside the Tuscaloosa drugstore, then casually walking 3 steps before Officer McGee tackled him from behind. The cigarette had already been stomped out by a passing schoolgirl, but Vernon still spent the night in jail thinking about his life choices and bad timing. 50. In 1950s Alabama, bringing a date home past the strict 10 p.m. curfew prompted the girl's father to turn off the front porch light as the final ominous warning before complete nuclear war broke out. Picture young Tommy pulling into the Henderson driveway at 10:03 p.m., only to watch in horror as the porch light flicked off in slow motion right before his eyes. Tommy practically threw Susan out of the car, peeled out of the gravel, and avoided that house for the entire summer. 51. Operating a pool hall or billiard room on a Sunday in 1950s Alabama was strictly illegal within town boundaries. The local preachers genuinely believed pool tables were the devil's furniture. Picture owner Frank trying to sneak open his Birmingham pool hall at 2 p.m. on Sunday for just 3 loyal customers. Sheriff Buford strolled in, confiscated every cue stick, and fined Frank $20. Frank argued the men were playing peaceful checkers in the back. Buford laughed and pointed at the chalk on their hands. 52. Public parks and playgrounds across 1950s Alabama were structurally segregated by race. Children could literally be arrested for using the wrong swing set. Picture 6-year-old Bobby Joe innocently wandering across an invisible line at a Montgomery Park to chase his runaway ball. Officer Wilson actually scolded him in front of his weeping mother. Bobby Joe just wanted to play on the slide. Meanwhile, the empty whites only swing sat collecting dust while 3 kids waited their turn nearby. 53. Using a gentleman's cloth handkerchief to wipe smudged lipstick off your face in 1950s Alabama was considered incredibly disrespectful to his personal property. Picture young Dottie at a Mobile Drive and dabbing her Revlon red onto Bobby's pristine white hanky after their first kiss. Bobby physically gasped. He demanded she pay for dry cleaning. His mama heard about the incident by Sunday morning. Dottie was banned from the family Easter brunch, and Bobby never trusted another woman with a hanky. 54. Coasting down a steep Alabama hill with your car shifted into neutral to save was actually illegal in the 1950s. Picture cheap old Mr. Pritchard rolling silently down Red Mountain in Birmingham, trying to conserve every precious drop of fuel. Officer Darrell pulled him over at the bottom. Mr. Pritchard argued he was just being thrifty. Darrell explained that neutral coasting was reckless driving under Alabama state law. The ticket cost him 3 times what he saved in gas. 55. A husband in 1950s Alabama held full legal control over his wife's wages. She literally could not spend her own paycheck without his consent. Picture poor Margaret working 40 hours a week at the Tuscaloosa textile mill. She had to hand every dollar to her lazy husband, Ronnie. Ronnie spent her hard-earned money on bourbon and fishing lures. Margaret once tried to buy herself a single new dress. Ronnie called the bank and reversed the transaction on the spot. 56. Washing your car on a front lawn directly facing a main highway in 1950s Alabama was banned for municipal aesthetic reasons. Picture proud new Chevy owner Donnie scrubbing his bumper in his Anniston front yard on a sunny Saturday. Officer McGee rolled up within 20 minutes. He wrote Donnie a ticket for ruining the visual appeal of Highway 78. Donnie argued his car was clean, patriotic. McGee said, "Son, you should wash in the back like a decent American." 57. Walking a girl to her front porch in 1950s Alabama required the boy to wait until she was physically inside the house before he could leave. Picture polite young Charlie escorting Mary Lou to her Selma front door after the church social. Mary Lou's daddy was watching through the curtains the entire time. Charlie tried to leave the second she opened the door. Mary Lou's daddy flung the front door open and demanded to know why he was running off so suspiciously. 58. Selling any retail alcohol on a local Alabama election day was entirely prohibited while the voting booths were open. The state worried about drunk voters. Picture liquor store owner Vernon in Mobile turning away thirsty customers all Tuesday afternoon. 3 desperate guys offered him double the price. Vernon refused every single one. Meanwhile, half the actual politicians were already sipping bourbon at their private campaign offices. Vernon got out at 7 p.m. and immediately joined them for a triple whiskey. 59. Public drinking fountains in 1950s Alabama were structurally built at completely different heights to intentionally reinforce social hierarchy. Picture the Birmingham courthouse lobby with 2 fountains side by side. One stood at normal adult height. The other was bizarrely low, like it was designed for tiny goblins. Visiting Yankee tourist Mr. Henderson stared in confusion for 10 full minutes. He finally asked the janitor what was going on. The janitor just shrugged and pretended he did not speak English. 60. Even if a 1950s Alabama dinner host explicitly said don't bring a thing, showing up without a gift was a massive social crime. Picture poor Yankee guest Frank arriving at the Worthington home empty-handed because Mrs. Worthington literally insisted on the phone. 3 ladies whispered as he entered. Mr. Worthington asked twice if Frank forgot something in his car. Frank stammered for an explanation. He drove home that night completely humiliated and never trusted a Southern hostess ever again. 61. Honking your car horn at a slow pedestrian in 1950s Alabama was treated as a massive public insult. Picture impatient salesman Murray stuck behind old Mrs. Pemberton shuffling across Main Street in Mobile. Murray gave her a tiny polite tap on the horn. Mrs. Pemberton stopped dead in the crosswalk. She turned around slowly. She marched right up to his window. She lectured him for 15 full minutes about Southern manners. Murray missed his sales meeting and apologized to her in church the following Sunday. 62. Female public school teachers in 1950s Alabama were frequently fired on the spot the moment they got married. Picture sweet young Miss Caldwell teaching 3rd grade in Tuscaloosa. She came back from her weekend honeymoon glowing with happiness. By Monday afternoon, her principal had cleared out her desk. He handed her a final paycheck and a polite goodbye fruitcake. Apparently, married ladies could no longer be trusted around impressionable children. Her replacement was a single 22-year-old who got married in October. 63. Leaving a personal trash container on a downtown Alabama sidewalk for over 30 minutes after pickup was a finable offense in the 1950s. Picture forgetful old Mr. Henderson in Birmingham rushing off to work after wheeling out his trash bin. He completely forgot about it until lunch. Officer Wilson had already written a citation by then. Henderson argued he was just busy. Wilson explained the bin had been sitting empty for 2 hours. Apparently, empty trash cans personally offended the entire downtown business district. 64. Sitting in a parked car at a dark Alabama overlook for too long in the 1950s prompted an immediate police flashlight inspection. Picture young couple Bobby and Susan parked at a romantic Birmingham hilltop spot, just chatting about their future. Officer McGee rolled up within 10 minutes. He shined his flashlight directly into the car. He demanded to know their full names and church affiliations. Bobby and Susan were holding hands and discussing baby names. McGee told them to move along immediately like criminals. 65. Discharging a firearm within Alabama city limits in the 1950s was illegal except for stopping an active animal attack. Picture old Mr. Pritchard chasing a single chicken-thieving raccoon through his mobile backyard with a shotgun. He fired one warning shot into the air. Within minutes, 3 squad cars surrounded his property. Mr. Pritchard frantically pointed at the raccoon scampering away. The officers demanded photographic proof of the attack. He spent the next hour trying to justify his shot to a confused judge. 66. Movie theater ticket windows in 1950s Alabama were physically segregated. Different demographics were forced to queue in back alleyways like garbage collection lines. Picture the Roxy Theater in Montgomery with one shiny front entrance and one grimy side door behind the dumpster. Poor Mrs. Jackson and her 3 children stood in the back alley in the rain for 40 minutes. Meanwhile, the front lobby sat half empty. The manager actually walked past her twice and pretended he could not see her. 67. Parents in 1950s Alabama were strictly forbidden by Southern etiquette books from ever having a minor disagreement in front of their kids. Picture Mr. and Mrs. Henderson and Selma silently locking eyes across the dinner table over burnt pot roast. They smiled tightly through dessert. The moment little Susie left to wash her hands, they hissed at each other like cobras. By the time Susie returned, they were holding hands and pretending nothing happened. The pot roast was eaten in complete silence. 68. Changing a flat tire on an Alabama state highway in the 1950s without setting out a bright red warning flag was heavily penalized. Picture poor traveling salesman Vernon stuck on Route 31 outside Birmingham Wrestling with a busted Goodyear. Officer Darrell pulled over within minutes. Vernon was confused. He was clearly already broken down on the shoulder. Darrell asked where his warning flag was. Vernon pointed at the entire flat tire situation. Darrell wrote him a ticket anyway and slowly drove away. 69. Young women in 1950s Alabama were expected to immediately master the art of baking a scratch-made pecan pie. It was the ultimate proof of domestic readiness. Picture 17-year-old Linda's first attempt at her grandmother's recipe. The crust came out looking like burnt cardboard. The filling was somehow both runny and rock hard. Her boyfriend Tommy politely choked down one bite. His mama heard about the disaster by Sunday. Linda was unofficially blacklisted from 3 potential mother-in-laws across 2 counties. 70. Allowing your dog to run loose without a leather collar displaying the owner's full surname was an immediate citation in 1950s Alabama. Picture little Jimmy's beagle Rusty escaping through the back gate one afternoon. Rusty galloped happily through downtown Anniston with a plain unmarked collar. Officer Wilbur scooped him up within 20 minutes. Jimmy's daddy had to pay a fine and engrave a fancy new nameplate. Rusty was now legally required to wear his last name like a furry little business. 71. Inviting a woman on a date via an impersonal telegraph line in 1950s, Alabama was seen as incredibly lazy. The request absolutely had to be made face-to-face. Picture nervous Harold sending sweet Margaret a telegram asking her to the harvest dance. Margaret's daddy intercepted the message at the post office. He marched it home and demanded to know why Harold was too cowardly to ask in person. Harold showed up the next day with flowers, and Margaret already had a new date. And there you have it, folks. 71 of the absolute dumbest social norms from 1950s Alabama that real human beings actually followed with a straight face. From lantern-lit wrong-way driving to mandatory pecan pie skills, the heart of Dixie was running on pure Southern chaos and sweet tea fumes. Now we want to hear from you. Which one of these ridiculous rules shocked you the most, and which one would you secretly bring back today? Drop your answer in the comments below, smash that like button if you laughed even once, and subscribe to Dumbest Things because next time we are exposing another state's hilarious historical madness that you absolutely will not believe was real. See you in the next one.